Coppicing is the oldest form of woodland management known to man. There are records from the Somerset Levels of tracks made from coppiced wood from 4000 BC. We've been doing it for ages and ages. And in its simplest form, it is cutting trees that have a coppicing response and making them shoot again from the base.
Welcome back to Wood for the Trees, our series exploring how we plant and manage trees and woodlands around the UK. My name is Charlie Lemarchant. In previous films, we have learned that a healthy woodland needs to be managed to recreate the structural diversity once shaped by wild herbivore. Coppicing is one of our oldest woodland practices, going back to well before the Bronze Age. For centuries, it has provided us with building materials, firewood, and tools for everyday life. Early humans learnt to utilise many trees' natural regenerative ability to regrow and resprout from the base when cut. This remarkable adaptation allows these trees to coexist alongside animals like the beaver, who also harvest trees in a coppice cycle and whom early humans likely learned from. Today, with around 40% of UK woodlands lying unmanaged, we ask, can the oldest form of woodland management help bring our woodlands back to life? To make this film, I travelled to two different types of coppiced woodland. First, I travelled to Devonshire Wood, near Falmouth, to meet Tom from Working Woodlands Cornwall. Tom and his colleagues have spent the last 9 years re-coppicing an ancient oak coppice that hasn't been worked for at least 80 years. Secondly, I visited a purely chestnut coppicing operation in Kent that has been run by 5 generations of the same family. I will let them introduce themselves.
My name's Tom Kemp, and I'm one of the directors and foresters with Working Woodlands Cornwall. We've been going for 9 years now, and our aim is to try and bring Cornish woods back into management and link the wood that comes out of those woods into local resources, whether that's firewood or charcoal or building materials. The only way in Cornwall to have a forestry career really is to set up a business yourself, because there aren't really many forestry businesses going. So that's what I did, and here we are now.
My name's John Lee Pemberton. We're standing in a block of woodland called Minching Wood, which is coppiced woods on the north slope of the North Downs in Kent. This is chestnut coppice, which has been managed by my family for 5 generations. I've got coppicing records for these woodlands going back to about 1850. And I have no doubt at all that coppicing went on in here probably for 600 or 800 years at least before that. So this is merely the continuation of a process that's been going on for at least 1,000 years.
So we're in Devonshire Wood. It's an ancient woodland owned by Cornwall Wildlife Trust. It's been coppiced over and over again for hundreds and hundreds of years. Primarily that wood was used for charcoal for the tin industry. The last time there was any significant work in this woods was around about 1940. Since then there was no management. A neglected woodland tends to become even-aged and certain species dominate, so you get structural uniformity and species uniformity, which is bad for biodiversity, it's bad for the health and resilience of the wood. The Wildlife Trust were aware they weren't sort of achieving the aims that they had for Devonshires. So we came along and said we can do your woodland management for you in return for the wood, and that was 9 years ago. So it's a really good relationship, sort of both of us achieving the aims. Our woods are sort of natural systems, but most of our ancient woods have had coppicing for a really long time. Coppiced woodlands were fuel producing woods. You get some specialisms like hazel hurdles and things like that, but even those woods were producing huge amounts of fuel, and essentially fossil fuels have replaced them over the last sort of 100 years really. Cornwall, our indigenous type of woodland and coppice is an oak coppice. You can see most of the canopy up here is oak, but in the south of England, sort of Devon, Somerset, Dorset, Hampshire up to the Midlands, that's quite a stronghold of hazel coppice. And then in the southeast and some parts of the Midlands, you have sweet chestnut coppice, which is, although an old process, only really dates from sort of the 1700s when hop growing was really popular. There's plenty of coppices in sort of the Midlands and East Anglia that are quite a mixed coppice. And then you have really specialist things like in Somerset, willow coppice, where it's cut every year and grows for basket making and other things.
You know, the coppice industry did go into decline in the latter part of the last century, partly because of the closure of the pulp mill at Kensley near Sittingbourne, which took 100 or 150,000 tonnes of timber, partly because of the decline of traditional products like hop poles, for example. Much of the chestnut planted originally to supply hop poles for the hop gardens of Kent, partly because it was a very small, fragmented industry and unable to, as a result, to either innovate or supply volume markets. I was driven to try and find alternative ways of keeping my woodland cut, because obviously if it doesn't get cut, the wood gets older, bigger, it's no use for making things out of. It tends to blow over after a while as well. So I started running a sort of small wholesaling business whereby I was buying products in from the people who had traditionally managed the woodlands here and all around this area. And then slowly but surely the business grew from there. Coppicing is the oldest form of woodland management known to man. We've been doing it for ages and ages. And in its simplest form, it is cutting trees that have a coppicing response and making them shoot again from the base. We don't have to replant. We don't have to do any thinning. We don't have to use any form of herbicides or management of any sort like that. It simply grows again of its own accord, and in 14 years' time, we come back and cut it again. It's effectively a crop, except that unlike wheat where we cut it every year or grass, we cut it every 14 years instead.
So the sort of woodland year for us here and for coppicing in general begins September time, where we're falling our coop, our area of coppice that we cut that year, and we finish falling it ideally by Christmas. And then we start to grade the wood out a bit. And this is a stack of wood that will be for charcoal. We'll probably char this, put it in the kiln next week. It's too small to be worthwhile taking down the road to our woodyard for firewood or for milling up. It's stuff like this essentially, but we don't want to see it go to waste. It's hard work cutting a coop. We need to sort of make every stick count. We keep the deer out through temporary deer netting and brash hedges. This one's been up a year and it's just about starting to rot down now, but by this point the bramble and the trees are above deer height and things can get away. The benefits you get from coppicing that is both sort of just a forestry benefit and also a biodiversity and carbon benefit is that when you let all that light in, not only do the stumps regrow, but you get loads of light demanding species like birch come up from seed. That sort of increases the stocking density. And something like birch isn't particularly high grade, but it will help draw up the oak and some of the more high-end species that we can add value to. Mostly this wood will be a fuel wood, and as we work this wood, we'll be leaving stems that are nice and straight, potentially for growing on, putting on a bit more fat so that the next rotation they're good for milling.
There are obviously lots of differences between what we're doing and the more traditional coppice activities. First of all, we're not making produce in the woods anymore. Everything comes back to our yard. Secondly, we are harvesting at scale, so we're cutting much bigger areas than might traditionally have been the case in one go. Thirdly, we are using harvesters. All of our larger wood that goes for making posts, post and rail and things like that is all cut with a harvester nowadays. So we are moving into a new era. But on the other hand, we are coppicing substantial areas with all the sort of environmental and landscape benefits that brings.
So a really important way that coppicing benefits a wood is that it starts to mix up the structure. And so once you start to coppice a woodland, you get variation in ages, and you get sort of scrubby areas, older, darker areas, you get light hitting the floor of the forest, you get sort of standards and deadwood, and with the light comes light demanding species, which adds that species diversity. There's a few brooms that sprung up along the edge of the track here. Before we did any work in these woods, when the canopy was almost entirely closed, there was no broom in here whatsoever. But broom seeds have this amazing ability to stay in the soil for decades, waiting for the light. Chances are the parents of these brooms set seed maybe in 1949 or 1959, and they've stayed in the soil after the canopy closed, waiting for the light, and we come along and add a bit of light, off they go.
You'll see here that the ground is essentially bare. If you came back here in May of next year, this would be a sea of bluebells. It would be a sheet of blue with primroses and wood anemones as well, spurge, all that kind of thing. As soon as the light's let in, whoosh, off everything goes. With woodlands like this, there is what is known as a rotation. And what that means essentially is that different blocks of the woodland are cut in different years. You might have 200 or 300 acres of coppice all in one block, but with an enormously varied age structure, which means that from a wildlife point of view, there is always a suitable habitat for the different specialists of wildlife that deal either with coppice that's 14 years old, which is mainly pigeons, down to stuff that likes 5-year-old coppice, like warblers and nightingales, 2-3-year-old coppice, very popular with nightjars, hares, etc. And similarly for, in terms of plants, the first 5 years is when you get the best plant cover under the coppice while there's still some light. After that, the canopy tends to close out and shade out the growth. But of course, the seed bank is then lying in the ground, waiting for the light to come so that it can regrow again.
So this is our charcoal that we make from all the bits we can't turn into firewood or other things. This is the end product. They're sort of nice big chunks. We sell to farm shops and shops locally. Charcoal is a similar story to timber and firewood. It's imported, often from really, really dubious sources. British charcoal's got a really good reputation for being high quality, but that's only because charcoal that we import, to get it safely across in a ship, you have to soak it with water, and then you have to soak it with paraffin to make it light.
So one of the things that is most satisfactory about this business is the way that we have made a traditional skill, i.e. hand cleaving and pale making, into an integral part of a modern manufacturing business. We are fortunate that the demand is high enough that we haven't been forced to try and reinvent the wheel or reinvent the fence post. It means that we can use the whole tree in a way that people have been doing for hundreds of years, because it is the most efficient way of making use of the timber that you've got in front of you. We like to think of ourselves as a zero waste business. Our peelings go to bed down cattle on the Isle of Sheppey. Our offcuts go to biomass for burning. So there is no real waste that comes out of this yard.
You can see quite a lot of standing deadwood behind me. That is all predominantly chestnut that has died from Phytophthora ramorum. It's a fairly normal scene in most woodlands now. There'll be sort of areas of pests and diseases. It's been brought about by the fact that we import so much wood. When you import wood, there's always a risk of importing a disease, especially firewood if it's got the bark on, and there's lots of firewood importation in the UK. And I would always stress the importance of buying local wood where you can.
Chestnut blight came in on planted trees from France about 20 years ago into the UK. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to be particularly vigorous here, which is very good news. Recently, a little tiny gall-forming wasp called Oriental chestnut gall wasp arrived in the UK. It escaped from an articulated lorry off the M25 near Farningham Woods and went straight into the chestnut there. It's now, after 10 years, I suppose, pretty much everywhere, quite frankly. With all other forestry in the UK, we also have a problem with squirrels. Grey squirrels have in the past 10 or 15 years started to damage chestnut coppice in a way that they have not done previously.
It's probably the biggest threat to our woodlands in the UK. Most foresters would agree that it's definitely up there. And you can see like this stem here has been totally girdled, totally ring-barked, and the stuff above is starting to die. You can see the leaves are getting a bit brown, and essentially everything above will die, and this tree will grow in a really crazy form. Could have been an interesting product, but now it's almost not worth us harvesting that for firewood even, because it's so wonky, it takes so long to process. So squirrels are a major problem, not just for the trees, but squirrels will be eating eggs, they'll be eating chicks that are sort of newly hatched. They have a really big impact on biodiversity generally, and they're transporting pests and diseases around. So this tree might not have had phytophthora, but the squirrel may have introduced it to the cambium of the tree.
It's the case for many rural livelihoods, but forestry especially is a relatively low-paid job, and it's in a rural setting where the house prices are often really high. Cornwall has multiple factors in that we've got a limited housing stock, second, third homes as well. Airbnbs all compete for the housing, which means, yeah, essentially we can't afford to live in the houses near our woods, and we have to find alternative solutions to the housing crisis.
The government's woodland planting schemes are sort of an active disincentive to planting coppice, because the payments and requirements for the grants say that you may not cut or harvest the timber for a longer period of time than most coppice rotations, which means that if you do plant woodlands for coppice, then you fall outside the grant system.
There is now a section of the Countryside Stewardship Grant that financially supports coppicing. However, it's not very nuanced, and potentially it requires, for example, 3 quotes. So if you already have an established coppice worker in your woods, suddenly you have to sort of threaten their access to the woods with 2 other quotes, which could potentially undercut them.
You know, the fact of the matter is that woodland management of any sort requires multi-generational consistent management if it's going to be of any economic value. And these woodlands here are a reflection of exactly that. But if in fact new plantings can be coppiced and then continue to be used as coppice, that's something that's within the scope of one lifetime and one generation.
It's really, there's a lot of potential to include coppicing in new planting designs. Loads of woodland creation schemes, even hardcore conifer creation schemes, have an element of broadleaf around the edge. A lot of the time that goes unmanaged. They include it because you get money from the planting scheme, but it's underutilised, and the fire prices are going up, and it's becoming more and more viable to manage the broadleaf element of any plantation, whether it's a plantation for conservation reasons or a plantation for growing loads of wood. Where sort of government could really step up is in terms of sort of helping to use local woods to reduce our reliance on imports, and that currently isn't really being supported. We live in a globalized market, and so we're having to compete with people in Estonia who have lower labor costs, for example.
Generally, I'm very optimistic about the state of the market and the demand for our products. And there's certainly more awareness of coppiced chestnut. It fulfills a lot of the sort of what I might call the 21st century requirements for sustainable, local, untreated, natural product. We're seeing a real increase in demand in the UK, which is very pleasing. And a lot of that is driven by NGOs or other organisations that need to make use of UK produced untreated timber, and I can't see that that demand is going to drop off at any point in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, in the future, I mean, I see coppicing as fulfilling quite a key niche in forestry. Obviously it can't sort of achieve sort of timber dimensions, but it fulfills sort of smaller diameter stuff, and I would really love to see more agricultural fencing using UK grown wood, and that will primarily come from coppice. I would love to see people who live in an area where they know their foresters and they know their coppice workers, and they buy their firewood or they sit in their local pub in front of a fire, and that wood comes from a local woodland down the road. We use so much wood, but so little of it comes from our doorstep. So we've got a huge opportunity to change that.